What would you say if I told you purgatory was real, and it's in the Bible, and I can prove it? In this video, we're going to walk through the biblical explanation as to why Catholics believe in purgatory and why you should too. And for this video, I'm not going to cite the dozens of church fathers that agree with me. I'm not going to look at the archaeological evidence that suggests that early Christians prayed for the dead, and I'm not going to use the famous passage from 2nd Maccabees, the apocryphal book. I'm only using the New Testament, books that Catholics and Protestants both accept, and I'm going to lay out an airtight argument as to why praying for the faithful departed is a biblical practice that dates all the way back to the time of the apostles. I'm going to walk you through this argument step by step, and at the end, I'll give you a cheat sheet so you can have all of this information in one place and you can use it to argue effectively with our Protestant brothers and sisters. On to the fun stuff. The first thing that we need to know in the scriptures is Revelation 21:27. It says, "Nothing unclean shall enter into heaven, nor anyone who practices abomination or falsehood, but only those who are written in the Lamb's book of life." What do we learn from this? We learn that in order to enter into heaven, you have to be totally sinless. In order to enter into heaven, you have to be free from all sin. You have to be pure. Which makes sense. The reward that the righteous are given in heaven is that they no longer have the ability, the inclination, or the desire to offend the Lord. That defect of sin is removed from them, and that's their reward for a faithful life here on earth. So the saints in heaven are more free than we are because the saints in heaven no longer have to worry about sinning. But in order to get there, in order to get to that point, to be with God forever in heaven, you have to be totally 100% free from all uncleanness, all sin, and all tendency to sin. Because that's what heaven is. It's a place where you're perfectly united with the will of God. And you cannot be united to God's will if you have any vices, any uncleanness, any sin, any bad habits whatsoever. That's the first principle. The second thing we need to know comes from the first epistle of St. John. He says this, "If we say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves, and the truth is not in us. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just, and will forgive our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. If we say we have not sinned, we make him a liar, and his word is not in us." St. John makes it very clear. Everybody has sin. You have sin. I have sin. Everybody has sins. So when we get to this point, we have to realize that in order to get into heaven, you have to be sinless. You have to be totally clean. And everyone in this life has sin. So there's no way for us to enter into heaven unless some purification happens first. And I'm going to explain exactly how that is. I'm going to go through how the Bible proves my point here. But in order for us to get into heaven, we have to first be purified and clean because every single one of us is a sinner. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. St. Paul says that in Romans chapter 5, and it's true for you and it's true for me. So in order for us to get into heaven, we first have to have that sin removed. We first have to be purified. And the third thing we need to know in order to understand this comes from 1 John chapter 5, verses 16 and 17. "If anyone sees his brother committing what is not a mortal sin, he will ask, and God will give him life for those whose sin is not mortal. There is a sin which is mortal. I do not say that one should pray for that. All wrongdoing is sin, but there is sin which is not mortal." St. John here is making a distinction that the church still makes today. There's a difference between sins that are deadly, sins that kill your spiritual life, and sins that do not kill your spiritual life, sins that are not deadly or not mortal. And the Catholic Church calls the not mortal sins venial, which in Latin just means pardonable or forgivable. So there are two types of sins. There are mortal and venial. If somebody has a mortal sin, St. John says, I do not say that you should pray for them. Why? Because they're dead and they can't benefit from the gifts that you're offering them. But if somebody has a sin that's not mortal, a venial sin, St. John says, pray for them and life will be given to them. Pray for them and that sin will be forgiven. So what do we see here? Well, we see that, first of all, you have to be totally clean to get into heaven. You see that in life, in this life, nobody is totally clean. And there are two types of sins. One is mortal, and the mortal sins, St. John says, don't pray for those. But the venial sins, St. John says, pray, and they will be forgiven. So this is the key. If someone dies with a non-mortal sin on their soul, they need to be purified before entering into heaven. And our prayers can forgive those non-mortal sins. That's the conclusion from the verses that we just went through. That is where logic leads you. You can see heaven, you have to be pure. This life, you are not pure. There's got to be something to connect those dots, otherwise nobody would make it into heaven. So if you're a Protestant and you're watching this, what do you think? Let me know in the comments. Is praying for the dead an unbiblical practice, or did these Bible verses change your mind at all? And if you want to hear more from the scriptures and the church fathers about how praying for the dead is a biblical and Christian practice, then check out this video next. And I almost forgot, the free resource is a link to the Google Doc that I use in this video. You can check it out in the description.